Right. Well, you've all seen it. I hope you caught it as it flashed by. Right. Let's get down to where I am. Right. There we go. Um, so I'm going to, not surprisingly, those that know me, I'm going to start by looking at the regulatory position for some of these things. Now, I can't cover. There's so much going on with the regulators at the moment around the world. I can't possibly cover it all. So I'm going to restrict myself to focus on two areas that are genuinely global areas of change. That it doesn't matter where in the world you are in this industry, you're going to be facing these changes. And the first one, of course, not surprisingly, is artificial intelligence. And then the other one is decentralized manufacturing. So after this, you're going to have a speaker talk to you about the real world of applying artificial intelligence. So it's a snapshot in time. Anyway, you follow the regulations, it's a constantly moving target. So I'm going to give you the current snapshot. In fact, some of this on AI has already changed since I put this presentation together just last week. So looking at AI, the first thing to say, AI isn't coming, it's already here. It's already here. And there's no doubt about it, it offers huge potentials for benefit for patients, which is what we're all about, let's face it. But of course, it has to be controlled, and the regulators, I think, are all kind of running to catch up to come up with a suitable regulatory environment. I say these challenges are global. I'm just going to restrict myself to looking at what's going on in the EU, what's going on in the UK, and what's going on in the USA. If I try to cover the entire world, we would be here just on this session until the end of the day. So the EU is the first, as far as I'm aware, the first jurisdiction to actually legislate, actually put legislation in place. Ooh. Oh, right. I hadn't noticed. I suppose I can see the monitor over there. I think that's showing the slides. There you go. Right. So the EU has been the first that I'm aware of jurisdiction to actually legislate, to actually put some regulation in place. It came out in July last year, so I did hear and talk about it last year. It kind of wrapped up a load of other stuff that was going on, so it goes in. Some of it's already in operation. The majority of it comes into force in August of next year, with a fag end hanging out for August the following year. I'm not going to go into what's in the legislation because, frankly, that's usually not where we need to be. But the next thing that always follows legislation is regulatory guidance. And generally, that's what impacts us the most, is the regulatory guidance. And we've got the draft of a new GMP Annex 22 published earlier this year. It's not massive. It's only 6 pages, but it's been written jointly between the EU and PICS. And most of you know the PICS countries. There's 52 countries in PICS, so it has a much broader reach. And I'm assuming the US FDA, because they are PICS members, would have had at least some input to it. And it applies to AI and machine learning models that have obtained their functionality. You have to read this carefully, through training with data rather than being explicitly programmed for GMP applications. And it applies to what they call static models. In other words, models that don't change their own programming as they go through. So they do not adapt their performance during use. And models with a deterministic output. In other words, again, they do not adapt their performance during use by incorporating new data. So that's for GMP applications. What it says is excluded and should not be used in critical GMP environments are dynamic models, which do the opposite of static. They are the ones, and the probabilistic models, which again are the learning models. And you shouldn't use generative AI large language models either in critical GMP situations. Where AI large language models are used for non-critical GMP, then I think this is the key for me. Personnel with adequate qualifications and training should always be responsible for ensuring the outputs from such models are suitable for the intended use. It's these things. It's all about the training. And I go back 30 years when I'm a, though you know me, I'm an ex-analytical chemist. And I remember when NIR first came into the labs, unlike conventional IR, you can't look at the spectrum and tell anything, basically. It's just a sort of wavy line that goes up a bit. But what you can do is train it and give it lots of things and eventually it learns and you get the right answer and you get the identity, and that's one of the main uses of it. And so it's no difference with these large language models. You've just got to train them with the right thing. And I think all of the regulators are worried about bias, about, you don't give it the right information, or you also omit certain key information, you can end up with a system that's biased. This is the structure. It emphasizes the requirements for the definition of the intended use of the model, establishment of performance metrics, quality of AI model training. Training is going to be challenging here because how many people actually understand these things and can train somebody else? Management and processing of test data, and the need for transparency and human oversight. I think all of the things I've seen in draft emphasize that last point, the need for human oversight. And it really is interesting. I've used it myself because, as you know, I look at regulatory intelligence. And when the new EU GMP Chapter 1 was published, when was it? Probably it was early September it came out. So I went into Copilot and said, compare the current version of Chapter 1 with the new version of Chapter 1 and see what it told me. And it gave me a really nice, extensive comparison of Annex 1, which is not what I wanted. And so it just demonstrated to me you need somebody to look at the output. It's completely 100% useless, the output I got. It had obviously picked up on the wrong bit of the internet, and there we go. So watch out. So that's Europe, and obviously the UK will, because we're still following the guidance, EU GMP, Annex 22 will apply to us, and we're part of PIC, so probably the MHRA hopefully had some input. But what are the UK doing? Well, at the moment, we're not legislating. That's the first thing. There's no UK legislation planned by the government. There was a bill introduced into the House of Lords earlier this year, in March this year. It's unlikely to succeed. It's really people do this to put pressure on the government to do something. So it's not going to get government support, I don't think. The MHRA, most of their guidance that's come out to date has been about medical devices, because obviously the software in devices is, very important. So most of the detailed stuff coming from MHRA is about devices. But obviously, Annex 22 will apply. But I saw just yesterday that they were setting up a new regulatory innovation initiative. So, they're starting to gear up for this stuff. They announced in September they were setting up a new commission. And again, I saw they had their first meeting, this new commission, just this week. And this commission is tasked with advising MHRA on how to rewrite the regulatory rulebook on AI in healthcare. So they say they're going to publish something next year. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. That is, the regulators usually are hugely optimistic on how long these things take. Having been in ICH, I do know how long it can take. But, they've got and I think actually they're going to try and meet that because the need is out there. And what they're doing is bringing together on this commission experts from the big tech companies like Google and Microsoft, as well as clinicians, researchers, patient advocates, and to advise the regulators. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out of that. The UK has joined something called the Health AI. Now, I'd never heard of them until this came out, and I Googled them. Apparently, Health AI have been around for a long time, and it's a fairly big international organization of experts in the AI field. Anyway, they've set up a health AI bit of this, the Global Regulatory Network. So Health AI formed in 2023. It's based in Geneva, consists of lots of experts. This Global Regulatory Network, the MHRA were the founder member. They set it up. I've been reading Singapore joined fairly soon afterwards. India joined in September. So again, I think we're going to have to internationalize whatever we do because the industry is global. You can't serve multiple masters around the world. It's not going to work. So we'll have to wait and see what comes out of this health AI. It does strike me as how are we going to integrate, Annex 22's in a draft and you've got the commission in the UK and you've got this health AI. Somebody's going to have to get a rope around it and try and pull it all together. The FDA have been making moves. They published artificial intelligence and medicinal products, how internally they would all be working together. That came out in March last year. And the FDA, in part of that, said they are very concerned about bias in AI systems. They've issued draft guidance. Again, it's only draft. It was issued in January this year with comments due by April. And that was based on earlier discussion papers they'd issued in 2023. And they had over 800 comments on those discussion papers that they issued in 2023. But as I say, it only applies to AI models that produce information or data to support regulatory decision-making. And just as the UK is setting up a commission, the FDA are setting up councils. And they're setting up 2 councils. They announced this at the end of August. The first one is the AI Policy Coordination and Planning Council, and that will focus on external AI policy and regulation, strengthening cross-agency collaboration. So hopefully this is an indication the FDA is prepared to join into international discussions, guiding cost-cutting solutions for AI, coordinating pilot programs for emerging technologies, and setting the direction for stakeholder engagement. And the second council is an internal one, and that's to identify and implement AI tools for use within the agency. Because it's not just the regulators need to control how we, the industry, use these tools. They are adopting the tools themselves. The FDA came up with ELSA. I think somebody'd been watching too much Frozen, but there we go. So they've launched ELSA in June this year. It's supposed to be helping them. It's a large language model designed to assist with reading, writing, and summarizing, presumably things like marketing authorization applications or INDs. So, the FDA are getting in on the act as well, and MHRA, again, are saying we're going to start using AI for help us assess marketing authorization applications. And it's not just the regulators. There's a massive amount of stuff being published on AI at the moment. There's an organization called BioForum. They published in July 67 pages on implementing AI systems in regulated pharma environments. I think you have to be a member to get hold of a copy of that, or know somebody who is a member who will kindly send you a copy. I won't mention how I got my copy. I haven't got a copy of this because it's too damned expensive. But ISPE have published a 290-page guide on artificial intelligence. It's £450 if you're an ISPE member and twice the price if you're not. So anybody got a copy that can share? Yeah. I think you have to be on the drafting committee. But again, it's a lot of stuff coming up on AI. And, everybody in the field, it's almost too much. It's all coming at you in from all different directions. But you need to keep moving. So AI is already being used. That's the reality of it. So the legislators and regulators are, to a large extent, trying to play catch up. The EU is the first jurisdiction to actually legislate. Everybody else is kind of going on the guidance, and it's the regulatory guidance that mostly impacts us. UK, MHRA, FDA have established commissions and councils to advise them on the future direction. One imagines there'll be a lot of comments on the draft of Annex 22, both from the regulators and ourselves. I wonder whether it's a topic to take into ICH so that we do actually get some international harmonization. I suspect the problem might be is nobody's quite sure what is the right level of regulation yet, and everybody's sort of testing the water. So I'll probably be talking about this next year and the year after, and we'll have to see where it goes. So that's AI from the regulatory point of view. It's very much in flux, I think, is the comment I leave you with. The other international thing that is definitely going to impact everybody and definitely is going to be an improvement for patients is the concept of decentralized manufacturing. And I think we have at least agreed internationally that term to cover this. It was called all sorts of other things, but I think we've agreed internationally we're going to call it decentralized manufacturing. The problem is a lot of the new technology, the new biotech products that we in Europe call ATMPs, the rest of the world call cell and gene therapy products, have very, very short half-lives. I was talking over dinner last night, Adam over there, and he told us a program where the half-life was 90 seconds. Now, the current model of making in a factory and sending it to a warehouse and then just isn't going to work. So, those products need to be made either very close to or even literally at the bedside of patients. So we need a new regulatory model, and we have it. And it's a UK first. Hey, power to the UK. It was been led by Jan Rees. Jan was actually a speaker at our first conference in 2023 because he left the MHRA and was then an independent consultant working with us. And now he's gone back to the MHRA, so he's no longer an independent consultant with us. He's back at the MHRA. But they issued a consultation back in August 2021. The government response was published in January 2023. And late last year, in I think October last year, we got legislation put before the UK Parliament, and that was approved on the 23rd of January. For those nerds want the number, it's Statutory Instrument 2025-87. It amends the basic regulations for human commercial medicines and investigational medicines. So that one statutory instrument amends two other existing statutory instruments. And it was implemented 6 months later on the 23rd of July this year. So we are the first jurisdiction globally to implement this new model. Now, the MHRA have not dreamt it up on their own. They have worked internationally, mainly through ICMRA. I think that's never, I have to remember what that stands for now. I think it's the International Council for Medicines Regulatory Agencies. It's a high-level thing, much higher level. PICS, is a club for inspectors. This is the heads of agencies. I think there's at least 16. I think there's about 24 agencies in ICMRA now and a number of observers. So it has been international, and we can see that in what's coming out from other jurisdictions. But the UK is the first country to actually implement it. So this term, decentralized, and this is one of Jan Rees's slides I have with his permission stolen, and it covers a whole multitude of things now. It's more than, the original consultation was about point of care, but the term now decentralized also includes, at the earlier stage, modular, what they're calling modular manufacturing, which is, maybe in a container unit outside in a hospital, something that you can actually pick up and move around, through to mobile stuff, through to actual point of care. That would be typically in a hospital or a clinic, or even in the home for patients. So all of that is decentralized manufacturing, and obviously the old factory making products is the centralized model. So it's up to the MHRA to decide whether your product meets their criteria for this to apply. And they're calling that assessment process designation. So you will develop a product, you think it's got to be delivered by one of these methods, and it's the product that will drive that decision. It's for point of care. The whole key words there, it can only be manufactured at or near to where the product is used. Not just because you'd like it to be, but it can only be. And similarly for modular manufacturing, for reasons of deployment, it has to be made in a modular way. So the first thing you will ask the MHRA is to say, basically, can we use the decentralized process? And you will get what's called a designation from the MHRA. I'll run through the whole process in a minute. So how's it going to work? What it's going to be, and they've asked me not to use the phrase hub and spoke model, because everybody started to use that, and even Jan did it in a May webinar. He called it the hub and spoke model. Well, apparently the government want to use that for something else. So I had to take hub and spoke off this. It's a control site with satellite sites around the outside. And it's the control site that's going to be critical to actually make this work. They will onboard new satellite sites. They will hold the manufacturing import authorization. They will have the qualified person. They will have the quality system, etc., etc. So that control site is critical to making this work. And they will manage the satellite sites. So most of the regulatory interaction will be between the control site and the regulators. The control site, once they've got that designation for a particular product, will then prepare what's called a master file, a decentralized manufacturing master file, a DMMF. It's a new acronym you have to learn. And that will go into either a clinical trial authorization or a marketing authorization. It could also, the control site could also have a specials license. What we call specials in the UK is a license to make unlicensed products. Okay, and so it could be a special site as well as a site holding an MIA. So obviously, it's going to be an interesting role to be the QP at that central site, managing. You're going to go to all sorts of questions. How many sites can you actually manage to manage? And so on. But all of that's to come. This is very new. So if you're an existing MIA holder or an existing MS holder, you will need to submit a variation to that license to add point of care or modular manufacturing to that license. And you can do that now. They've actually amended the application form for both variations and for the initial MIAs and MSs to add these as, you have the radio boxes you tick to say what types of product you want to make at that site. So they've added modular manufacturing and point of care to both the variation form and the initial application form. It's the control site then would need to prepare a decentralized manufacturing master file, and that will contain the detailed descriptions of the arrangements for the manufacture or assembly of a point of care or modular manufactured product. Each product will need its own master file, and the MHRA, is there a template for this now? The MHRA has set up a very useful hub for all this stuff. You can go on the hub and get all this. You've got all the templates there. And obviously updates and changes to that will need to be reported to the MHRA at least annually. So it's the control site that will receive the routine GMP inspections, and plus the MHRA said they're likely to inspect a sample of the remote satellite sites. So you won't know where they're going to be picked on. They're encouraging you to use the ICH Q8 control strategy approach because the control sites will be legally responsible for the quality system. And obviously, the control site will be expected to have technical agreements between the control site and each of the remote sites. The control site will need to set minimum criteria for qualification and experience of the designated person responsible for release at the remote site. Some of the time, it's going to have to be a bit like radiopharmaceuticals. There's not going to be time for the normal QP certification. You're going to have to set up a process for point of care whereby you have some criteria by which the product can actually be used, and then later on, it gets QP certified. That process has been operating for radiopharmaceuticals for years, so that's not exactly new, but it will be applied for point of care. For modular manufacturing, that won't apply. You will have to get QP certification. Obviously, the central site will assess product and process for deviation, changes to the number and location of remote sites, and compliance with the substances of human origin requirements, which are also out there. In the UK, that would be the HTA requirements. So this is the process in total. A company will be developing a new product, probably a cell or gene therapy. They will decide that they think you can only deliver it to patients either using modular manufacturing or point of care. They will then apply to the MHRA for this designation. If the MHRA give them that designation, it has a number. So then will then apply to the MHRA in the context of either a clinical trial authorization application or a marketing authorization. If that designation is granted, they will just quote that number in the CTA or MA application. Obviously, they must name a site that has either point of care or modular manufacturing within their scope. So again, they'll be looking for sites. And then they will submit their application for a CTA or an MA, naming the site that has the point of care or modular manufacturing designation. And the MHRA will then assess the CTA or MA in the normal way. QPs. How many QPs in the room? Yes, quite a few. I thought we would. Yes. Sadly, the legislation makes no mention of any additional legal responsibilities for the QP for this new process, which I think is a shame. I think I was disappointed not to see. It just says the normal sort of motherhood and apple pie statement. The QP is to ensure that each product has been manufactured and checked in accordance with these regulations and the requirements of the MA. Well, duh, that's already in, always has been. Unlike the EMA, the EU issued draft revisions to the human medicines legislation back in April 2023. They had a very similar setup, not surprisingly, because Jan had been working with the EMA on this central site and satellite sites approach. But the draft of the Human Medicines Directive had new legal responsibilities. Not high-level stuff, but it states the obvious, if you like. But it gives the QP then the authority to actually manage this, the legal authority. So new duties for central QP when managing decentralized manufacture, supervise the manufacture or testing activities carried out at the decentralized sites, making sure they comply with GMP, provide the written confirmation of GMP compliance, and tell the authorities when things go wrong, which I think is just nice to see it actually there in writing. I'm assuming that will survive. We do not have the final version of that. It's those of you who are interested, this revised human legislation is now at the trialogue stage, as they call it. We've had the draft from the Commission, we've had the European Parliament's 2 penneth worth on it, and now we've had the Council of Europe's 2 penneth worth on it. Now they have to all get together and have a bun fight and decide on a final version, and that's where they are at the moment. We got the Council version issued in June, in late June this year. My guess, people keep saying to me, when are we going to get the final version? My guess would be early next year, I hope. I'm running a law course at the end of April, and my nightmare is all the course has been put to bed, it's already there, we've sent it to the delegates because we send it a week before the course, and then this gets finalised. Well, it will be whatever it is. But I would be surprised if we go beyond the middle of next year and don't have the final version. But then, of course, that will then have an implementation period, which is typically 2 or 3 years. So whilst the EU will end up with a process that looks just like the UK process, it's going to be 2 or 3 or 4 years behind the UK because we did it this year. My guess is the earliest we're likely to see the revised EU human medicines legislation in effect would be 2028. So that would be 3 years behind the UK. The US is doing something similar. They issued a draft, a consultation back in October 2022, and then they had some workshops on that in November that year. And from that engagement, they published the outcome of that in November 2023. And basically, they said this, I'm going to call it the hub and smoke model, or this decentralized, this central site with satellite site model is the one to go with. But we've not heard anything from FDA since. Is there anybody in FDA? I don't know. We'll hear from Julie later. Yes, things, shall we say, are a little disorganized at the moment in the FDA. So whether we'll get to see anything coming out of the FDA in reasonable time, I do not know. So to conclude, many of the global regulatory authorities are issuing measures to control the application of AI and machine learning and to regulate, whatever you call it, decentralized manufacture, modular, point of care. And the UK is the first to implement the new regulations for point of care and modular manufacturing. So that's a very significant development, in my opinion. So thank you.